Hi, this is Pat Fraley, purveyor of Duck, Dog, and Villain voices, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
There is nothing wrong with your podcast player. Do not attempt to adjust the volume. Hello and welcome into our studio. This is Studio 2009. I'm, of course, TFG and Mike. And for our latest podcast approach today, we welcome Ryan, a.k.a. Norm, Daly Peterson from Cheers Cast. We're going to take Ryan through how he listens to and produces his podcast and other things and how he got all that good stuff started. Ryan, how the hell have you been?
I'm okay. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Yes, I was had the chance last year at the end of 2023 in October to be on Ryan's lovely show Cheers Cast, where he is going through every single episode, all 275 of them, which includes like 2 or 3 2 hours and then a 3-hour finale, or maybe it isn't a 3-hour finale. I forget. It was a triple-length episode for the finale. But anyway, yes, Ryan is going through all of that. And as of this time in 2024, in February of 2024, do you know where you're going to be in the show?
Probably starting Season 7 and releasing new episodes of Season 7.
Very cool, very cool. All right, so we have 30 questions, as you fine folks would have heard in the last podcast approach, episode 70, because we do these every 5 episodes of this podcast. Episode 70 was the final episode of 2023, and we added up to 30 questions now, so it's an even number, 30 instead of just 27 questions like it used to be. Getting started as podcasters. When did you first discover podcasts, and what was the first one you listened to?
I believe the first podcast that I listened to was the Word Balloon podcast hosted by John Suntress. And I discovered it because at the time, and this would have been around 2006 or 7, I was frequently looking at the comic book website Newsarama just for information on like upcoming comics and things like that. And John Suntress often did interviews with some of my favorite comic book artists and writers. So I like at first I was just kind of reading snippets and bits that were transcribed from his interviews to kind of get behind the scenes factoids, and then I actually realized, hey, I could click on this thing and play the whole interview for myself and listen to it. And that, I think, was the first one that I kind of listened to, and I realized that, hey, there's this whole back catalog of previous episodes that I hadn't listened to, and I would go back and yeah, those were the first podcasts that I was listening to, or things like that, which were all comic book reviews or comic book interviews.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So how long after you started listening did you want to start your own show?
It was quite a while longer. It was, 10 years or something. I was following along and getting involved in some blogging first, and I'd grown up as a big fan of Marvel Comics, and then I started kind of venturing away from Marvel into DC in the late 2000s, but just there was so much history there, and I was looking for shortcuts to give me like information and background on characters and things like that. And Wikipedia could give you a lot of that information, but I discovered these very specific blogs dedicated to characters, like Aquaman and Firestorm and the Martian Manhunter and all these weird characters, and these people who had dedicated years blogging about like every villain this hero has faced and seminal issues and all the character chronology. And I started like reading their entries and responding and giving feedback to these blogs, and before long I said, hey, that's something that I kind of want to do and get interested in myself. So I started my own blog about the DC superhero Black Canary, and then just as I was doing that, one of the two of the blogs that I was really following along with, the Aquaman Shrine and Firestorm fan, they started their own podcast dedicated to Aquaman and Firestorm, the Fire and Water podcast, hosted by Rob Kelly and the Irredeemable Shag. And
so that's where the name comes from.
That's where it came from, yeah. And yeah, and it was just like listening to that stuff. And this is around 2015-ish, I think it was. Mm-hmm. I probably should know these dates better, but I don't have a head for that. And then before long, I mean, first of all, those guys, they had such a great rapport, and instantly they welcomed an audience, and they cultivated this audience by seeking reviews, by seeking feedback, and just really being engaging with their listeners. So I wrote them a lengthy iTunes review, and they read that, and that made me feel like these weren't just these guys who I was like listening to like from 1,000 miles away, that I was actually a peer or a friend of theirs, and I was involved in the conversation themselves. And they made it look very easy, which it's not. But they made it look really easy, and at the same time, a lot of my other friends who had started off doing these podcasts were now getting into, or starting off doing blogs about comics, were kind of getting into the area of podcasts, and I discovered a sort of satellite of all of these other friends who or community members that were involved in this podcasting field of Superman and Daredevil and the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man and all these things that were interested. And this just became an obsession. This was all I did with my free time, was just listening to these episodes. And some of them were just kind of extemporaneous conversation pieces, and some of them were reviews of specific issues, and they would be on topics. But I was fascinated by what you could do with this medium. And again, thinking that this would be easy, it was probably within a year around that I started thinking that, yeah, I could probably do this myself. And then it was just a matter of finding out which topic would be my first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you and I tangentially know a lot of the same people. We up until my first guest spot on his lovely show Cheers Cast, which we will get all the details about that in a little while. Ryan and I, this is the second time we've talked to each other, like through podcasting and through voice and through whatever. But we've been friends on Facebook for a while or whatever else. But like, you mentioned Rob Kelly, you mentioned the Irredeemable Shag. I actually asked Shag to be on the comic show where I have 30 questions about comic books. He's like, I'd love to be on it, but it probably won't be till next year. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever you need. Like, when you just let me know.
I'm sure when you told him it's 30 questions, he was like, no, that's never going to happen. If you had told me in advance that you were going to ask me 30 questions, I would have said, I don't get that self-reflective about my life for anybody who doesn't charge me $250 for an hour.
Well, I mean, I'll promote your shows. You come on my, it's all.
There you go.
Yeah,
reciprocity. I get it.
Yeah, there you go. But it's just one of those things where between him, Michael Bailey, you mentioned Superman earlier, Tom DJ, may the man rest in peace, Derek Ferguson. God, Derek's been gone a long time. Damn it. I'm sure we know a lot of the same people, like I said, tangentially. But yeah, no, it was fun being on your show, and hopefully you'll have a blast here. So what was your plan in getting your podcast off the ground?
Oh, if only I had had a plan. That would have made things so much easier. I didn't really. I studied how to actually, or I looked into just how to host it and what to actually do. And I saw and asked a few people, and what was the first site that hosted me? I cannot remember.
It's probably Libsyn.
Libsyn. Well, you're right. It was Libsyn. Thank you. That's probably the go-to for most starters. Yeah, I decided I had so many topics running around. I had like comic book ideas. I had Cheers idea. I had G.I. Joe ideas. But I decided the first one I would start with was a Star Wars one, because it was going to be 2015, and they had just announced this new merger with Lucasfilm being bought out by Disney, and there were going to be new Star Wars movies. So I was like, okay, I love Star Wars, and there's going to be plenty of content coming out fresh, so I'll always have something to talk about. So I decided my first show would be a Star Wars related podcast. Mm-hmm. And then I found a host. I found Libsyn would be the host. I did not have any technology. I didn't have a separate microphone. I was recording my voice into just using the bare bones like microphone built into my laptop, which was horrible. I hated the sound of my voice. I went into different rooms. I recorded the first episode 7 or 8 different times just to try and find out like which room where my voice sounded better, because I wasn't sure if this was going to be a thing, so I didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. So I just kind of like I tried different things and just tried doing it on the cheap, and part of it was just ignorance. I didn't know how other people did it. I never asked them, what kind of technology do you use? What kind of mic do you use? Do you have your own studio? Do you have like a soundproof room or something like that? None of these thoughts ever came into my head. I was just like, well, I'll just figure it out. So I did. I produced the first episode, which was just me talking to my wife about like the trailer. It was like the teaser trailer to The Force Awakens, the one that came out in like Thanksgiving of 2014.
Right.
The episodes sounded terrible, but like I'm talking like quality wise.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to balance the volume. I didn't know how to like modulate anything. Like I was just coming in this completely fresh. But I was like, they make it sound so simple, and I can't be this dense. So I experimented with it, and I had like a 30-minute conversation. I was like, okay, somebody might find this interesting. And I published it to Libsyn, and I created this podcast called Dead Boffin Spies, which I thought was a really clever, really cool name. Never realizing that if you want somebody to find your Star Wars podcast, it's probably a good idea to have Star Wars somewhere close to the title, because there are thousands, if not more, Star Wars podcasts out there. So the more esoteric your title is, not going to help you get clicks and downloads. And then from there, the next episode, I was like, okay, I'm going to interview somebody. So I got like a handheld microphone from Radio Shack back when Radio Shack was a thing. And I just sat down and like recorded that, and then like tried to like import the microphone through a USB to the whatever the GarageBand program that I was using to edit. And I at least knew a little bit about editing, because I had tried making music with that software. So I was okay about like editing some of the uhs and oops and like sound gaps and things like that. And then like I tried one of the first episodes I tried, it was a conversation like this recording on Skype, and I didn't even buy a recording software program. I was literally had like the sound coming out of the computer and recording it onto a separate microphone. And I play that back later, and I was like, this is horrible. What am I doing? And I finally actually looked into this, and I was like, okay, I got a $25 headset microphone combo for like Logitech from Best Buy or something like that, which I've bought the same model several times because I like it for what it is. I don't have a Yeti or a Snowball or anything like that. I've never wanted to spend that much money on this hobby because I haven't wanted to be that professional about it. I've kind of kept it at an arm's length. So I've thought as long as that makes me sound decent enough, I'm okay with that for a product that I'm not charging anybody to listen to.
Yeah.
And then, just investing a little bit more, actually buying a separate software to record Skype conversations, learning a bit more how to level and balance those things to make it sound a little bit more professional, not giving a damn about copyright infringement and using licensed material like audio and songs, and then putting that on Spotify, and Spotify saying, you can't do this, we're going to take your show down. But that happened many years later.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, starting out in 2008 and 2009, we were doing all the same things. And there are several shows on the Geekcast Radio Network that aren't around anymore, not because they closed. Well, number one, because they ended, and number two, because I was that cavalier about it half the time with the audio, and it wasn't even songs. It was just audio clips. It was just sound bites from, Open Door Creek. Hi, everybody. No, just whatever. But those were the old days, and oh boy, which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of like, I still do review shows. We still do review shows. We still do discussion things, but ever since, like I said, the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I just started aiming more towards this question and answer format because it's the easiest thing for me to do, to have a fun conversation with anybody. I don't care who it is. As long as they have a good microphone and have at least 1 year of podcast experience, come on the show and answer the questions or whatever kind of thing. And that way I don't have to worry about not putting in clips that aren't supposed to be there and this, that, and the other thing. The editing is so much easier, because it's just bing, bam, boom, and everything else. You've essentially answered questions 5 and 6, but back to question 4. Which do you prefer, audio or video podcasting as a fan and a producer?
5 and 6? I thought we were up to question 20 at least.
Oh. Not yet.
Do I prefer audio or video? That depends. For the longest time, I wasn't watching like original content on YouTube other than like videos of puppies and things like that. Like, I was only listening to audio podcasts because, again, this had become very quickly like my community. I felt like I was a part of this group of people in like specifically in like this pop culture, comic book, sci-fi podcasting world, and I was kind of immersing myself in that, listening to their shows, inviting them on my shows. Again, that reciprocity thing that we talked about. And so I didn't like it just seemed kind of innately like podcasting was a audio thing, and the YouTube content creators, I just held almost a separate category that I don't know if it really exists anymore. I do watch a lot more YouTube videos now for things like action figure reviews, reaction videos. Actually, I do kind of get sucked into people like who do like reaction videos for like shows like The Office or The Haunting of Hill House or things like that, and just like weird little things where I'll find like this group where I kind of like their chemistry and I can watch them for a little bit. And some of those I do find the engagement of the people visually like better than listening to an audio version. So I can't say that I prefer one over the other without saying it might depend on the hosts, the quality, the engagement, the content of what they're actually talking about. Yeah, I listen to a lot fewer podcasts now, regular audio ones. I'm listening to more music and audio books than audio podcasts. So yeah, that has changed a bit.
Yeah, it's strange, and just so I go through the motions, 5 and 6. Question 5, what kind of setup did you have when you started podcasting, which you've already answered, and what do you have currently? I guess you could tell us what you use currently.
It's a Logitech headset with a microphone that is just plugged in with your USB into the computer. I bought a separate Skype recording software to do most of my conversations, unless I'm recording on Zoom with some guests, depending on their preference. And I edit either in Logic Pro or GarageBand. They're both programs for Apple.
Yeah, it's funny because, and I don't know if Skype for Mac or Apple or whatever things are falling off that tree. I don't know. I know Skype for Windows has a built-in recorder now. It didn't used to. Like you said, you had to I remember back in the day we had to purchase Pamela Call Recorder because Skype didn't have a built-in recorder. And then once, Bill Gates and his infinite wisdom and everybody else over there at Microsoft decided to buy Skype, they eventually put in a built. That's how I'm recording it now. Is it's built in through Skype now.
Yeah. When I was starting out, that wasn't a thing, so I bought it's call recorder for Skype, and I like it because it actually gives me options of exporting the recording either both me and the guest, whoever I'm talking to, on one channel or separate channels.
Yeah.
I can change it depending on how I want to edit it. It gives me a lot of options that way, and I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And question 6, if your headphones or mic break down, do you buy this exact same setup or do you choose to upgrade? Obviously, you said that you choose to get the same stuff.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the same way I've been. I've never really, when I started out, it wasn't even Logitech. It was like a $5, $10 Walmart version. I have the picture is on Facebook somewhere of me just kind of like looking off to the side. So in the frame is the earpiece with the microphone coming out. It was under $20 at Walmart back in 2008. But since then, ever since I think it was 2010. I found the CAD U37 condenser mic, which is the mic I'm using now. I've had to replace it. A friend of mine got me one, and then I had to replace it once, and it was fine. Had to replace it twice, the second one, because that was a couple of years ago now that I had to, in almost 12 years, however the hell long 2010 was ago. The CAD U37 isn't exactly... It's not, around much anymore, but apparently they put out a newer, same version as far as I could tell, except it was black instead of silver or gray. And I plugged it in. My buddy Steve, who created the GCRN with me, he's like, yeah, no, that sounds like crap. I'm like, really? I'm like, it's brand new. He's like, yeah, no. I'm like, okay, fine. And really, the stupidest thing was, and I know USB cords can be interchangeable, but for some odd reason, the crappy USB cord, I lost the USB cord to the original mic. So the crappy, replacement one I was using wasn't working well. So I'm like, okay, fine. That was the main reason why I wanted to buy another one of these damn things. And I just basically have the other microphone somewhere, and I'm still using the same one I had in 2010 when I replaced it the first time. So, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, folks. Did you think you'd be podcasting for as long as you have?
No. I still don't understand why I still do it. I wake up every day. Enjoy it that's a loaded term.
We'll get into that.
Yeah. No, when I started, I could not foresee this far into my own future to expect that I would be doing this. No.
All right. So how have your goals in podcasting changed since you started compared to now?
That is an interesting question. My goals when I started were to create a product that other people would find interesting and engaging and want to come back and listen to the same way that I was doing when I was listening to and finding these other people. And it was all about I've never been so concerned about just brand growth and trying to get trying to get, Fat Man on Batman numbers or Joe Rogan numbers. I never even considered doing that. That's not even what I like. I would have to turn this into a career, and I don't want to do that. So it was all about just can I get a dedicated audience of however many people who just enjoy this, who think that I am interesting enough or that I'm creating a product that is enjoyable enough to come back to every week or every month or every couple of days, however long it is between shows. That was my main goal. It was all about servicing the audience. And to that end, I was doing shows that I thought other people would find interesting, but didn't necessarily fulfill me in the same way. And after I started I started with the Star Wars podcast, and that was sort of my beta test to see if I could actually do that. Then I took aspects of my Black Canary blog to see, okay, can I do a comic book podcast where I'm actually like reading a comic, reviewing it, going through these aspects, and like giving my thoughts on this podcast the way these other shows like Michael Bailey does, or Tom Panarese, or J. David Weeder, or Rob Kelly and Shag, and the Irredeemable Shag, like these guys. And I tried doing that with a Black Canary podcast. And after I felt like, okay, I have this system. I think I know what I'm doing here. I felt confident enough. I had an idea for a project because, again, thinking that Rob and Shag, they had brought these other people into their community of podcasters by having certain guests from the blogosphere that they created of DC superhero blogs, bringing them into their podcast as guests to discuss team-ups or certain issues or things like that. I really liked that idea, and I was like, can I do a podcast that has the same centrality of covering a DC comic, but would have a rotating cast of guests to build a sense of community and camaraderie amongst myself as the host and the guests, but also to grow an audience that would kind of like feel like they were part of it too. So I tapped into the 1980s DC comic book miniseries Secret Origins. It was a 50-issue series with 3 annuals. So I knew from the jump, okay, I'm only going to do these 50 issues. So I wouldn't have to worry about burning out. I knew this wasn't going to be a plan that would take me years. Like I thought, if I ever cover Cheers, I'm going to have to do that for 270 episodes. Can you imagine doing something that long? I could not believe it. I had no sense of foresight that. But I was like, 50 episodes. I can do a show for 50 episodes. If it's weekly, that's 1 year out of my life. Mm-hmm. So I broke it down with Secret Origins, and I said, okay, every story is going to have a different guest, and I'm going to go to the blogosphere. Okay, there's a Martian Manhunter story, origin in this issue. I'm going to talk to Frank, who runs a Martian Manhunter blog. There's a Plastic Man story in this issue. I'm going to reach out to this guy, Max, who runs a Plastic Man blog. Didn't know if these guys had ever done podcasts before, if they cared about anything like that, but I asked them, and they reciprocated, and they was like, okay, this is going to be like months down the road. Hope we're still talking and we're still friendly when this comes. And then luckily, like when I talked to Rob and Shag about it, they were very interested, and they helped me network with their audience and find this, French Canadian guy named Siskoid, who was like, I'll be your guest on every one of these Golden Age stories if you need me. And Chris Franklin and his wife Cindy, who would help me out, and Chris became my first guest on the show, actually. So we did this Secret Origins show, which was, for me, a huge, unparalleled success. I built an audience that was more loyal and larger and faster than I could have possibly foreseen. And I had so much fun doing that show, and there was such a high after that when that show was over and I had successfully completed the mission and it only took me about a year and a half, I had all of these ideas that I thought the audience would like, and I spread myself way too thin in the aftermath, trying to do too many projects that I thought would appeal to too many different fans of the show that I had done, while at the same time in my personal life getting pregnant and having a baby coming into the world. And I within a few months, I hit this I smashed into not being able to manage my real life of becoming a new father and having 5 new podcasts that I was trying to get done every 2 weeks, with multiple guests and the kind of content and the kind of production value that I was used to putting into them, and it sort of kind of exploded, and it became unmanageable for me, and it turned into this issue. And I think I'm circling back to the question of how my goals have changed.
Sure.
I had to talk to my co-hosts and these guys who would really it's like halfway through Secret Origins podcast, Rob and Shag expanded their show into a Fire and Water network, and they graciously invited me to be one of the founding members with them, in part because we had the exact same audience, and they wanted me to be in their umbrella and kind of keep the same friends. But these guys, just because of my own social life and things at home, like these guys who I had never met at the time became very quickly my best friends and like family members to me, because I was talking to them more frequently than anybody else in my life, and about stuff that at the time was more important and more relevant than anything else in my life.
Yeah, that's the way podcasting is.
Yeah. And all of this, again, in like hit this point where it became all consuming, and like a flame just burnt out. And I had to talk to these guys. I was like, I can't keep doing this show right now where I'm at, because I know the audience really, really enjoys this, and the audience wants us to keep doing the show, but it's not fun for me. It's turning into a job, and I never wanted podcasts to be a job. I wanted it to be a hobby or a creative outlet or some kind of release, an escape. And it wasn't fun anymore. And I was like, if I'm not having fun, I'm not going to do good work, and it's gonna reflect on that. So when that happened, that's when my goals shifted, and I said, I don't care if I stop podcasting altogether. I'll quit this tomorrow. It has to be fun. Every episode I do, it has to be something that engages me. So what are the things I stopped caring about? This sounds harsh, but I stopped caring about like growing a large dedicated audience. I was like, I just need to have a show that makes me have fun. And when I thought of doing Cheers, I was like, Cheers could be a big project. I could take 10 years out of my life, but if I never finish it, I don't really care, because I'm not doing it for anybody else. I'm not doing it for the listeners. I'm doing it for myself. And I'm doing a music show that most of the episodes I collaborate with my brother, and that's just a fun way for us to get together and talk about the music that we grew up with and shaped our lives. And that's a fun thing. And that doesn't get the same kind of response and the same kind of engagement. And every once in a while, I still go back and I'll do a Star Wars podcast. I'll pick some random topic. And that, again, there's thousands of Star Wars podcasts, and at least 900 of them are better than mine. And I'm fine with that, because I don't need thousands and thousands of downloads and clicks. If I just get 2 people to comment and say, that was worth my hour listening to that episode, cool, that's fine. So yeah, the way my goals have changed is just I'm only podcasting just for myself, and just for a feeling of expressing this creative outlet. And if that means the audience doesn't come with me, I accept that.
So it's funny that you say, that's your story. My story is the exact flip of that coin. I started this doing just basically like, okay, I'm going to sit down, have fun, whatever. At the time when Steve and I first started, I'm like, look, I just want to record this stuff. I just want to show up and talk. You can do the editing, blah, 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 blah. Sometime in 2010, Steve, I've always said this. I've said this for 15 years. Life comes before podcasting. If any of the hosts, co-hosts, whatever, have something going on in their life, as long as they tell the audience before the show disappears for whatever amount of time, as long as you inform the audience will be there when you come back. Because if they were there the whole time beforehand and they liked what you did, once you come, it's kind of like, how can I miss Star Wars if it never goes away? Anything, not just Star Wars, but like anything, like TV show, movie, whatever. Mm-hmm. So how I approached it was, I'm doing this I'm having conversations with my friends. I'm having a fun time. Back then I liked the editing. Now that's a whole other, we'll get that in a little while. But it was never about the downloads. It was about the audience, but the audience wasn't the biggest takeaway for me at the time, and it still kind of isn't. I mean, I have a lot of dedicated fans that listen to the stuff that we do, and I love all of them and everything else, and I love that they've been supporting us over the years, but like, we don't have a large audience. We aren't, like you said, big number celebrity podcasters. But, it is what it is, and that's just, like I said, that's the way podcasting is. It's meant to bring like-minded people together who want to have a conversation about whatever cool topic it is they want to talk about.
Yeah. I didn't realize it at the time. It took me a couple of years, but I started to make friends. And I did that, and now that I've got those friends, I kind of feel like I don't think I need the podcasting to stay friendly with them. I think there's enough of a relationship there that if I quit this endeavor, I could still hang out. I could still talk to those guys. I mean, I've met almost all of them face to face now, and we've had good experiences.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great. But most of us and I'm not including me in your as you're talking about your friends here, but I'm saying, you know what I mean. I don't mean it to sound in the group you were just talking about. I'm not putting myself into that group. But the point for me with podcasting is, like, we don't always get together. We don't always whatever. We're not recording a weekly show. We're not recording a monthly show, whatever it is. Like, that's why I love doing the co-host thing where I'm the host and somebody else, like, oh, hey, how have you been? We haven't talked to you in a while. It's kind of a catch-up thing. Or if you end up doing a weekly show, you get to sit down with your friends once a week. If that's all the time you get, that's all the time you get. And, of course, there are Facebook messages or whatever they're calling DMs over on that other server. I don't even know what they're calling stuff over there anymore. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's the instant message of text messaging or instant messenger or whatever, and then there's being able to sit down for a half hour, 45 minutes, hour and a half, whatever it is, to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, there are people who I podcast with who every time, like, I'll talk to them once a year, twice a year, maybe. But before we get on to the recording, like, the first question I'll ask is, how's your family? How's your son doing? Is he in kindergarten yet? Or he's, like, talks, things like that. And I was like, oh, yeah, like, he actually cares, and he remembers things about my personal life, and, like, we engage this way. And that's fun. It's fulfilling.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into your podcast listenership. As a listener, what defines a good podcast to you?
This is a really tough question because it is so subjective, but I guess that's why you ask many people this question. What defines a good podcast? Somewhere a happy medium, and it depends on what you're looking for, but somewhere between informative and entertaining, or a little bit of both. It should tell you something new. Now, that what that new aspect is, or what the informative part could be in the content, whatever it is, if it's a review show, if it's reviewing a TV show or a movie or a book or a piece of art or literature, anything like that, or if it's an interview or some other kind of, like, TED Talk or thing like that, it should give you something new, whether that newness is in the content or just the author or the guest or the host's opinion about that. Should be something that I don't already know, hopefully. And then entertaining, and that, your mileage may vary. Well, again, the content itself could be very entertaining, or the host could just be naturally funny or clever or whimsical, or if it's a partnership or a group, their repartee, how like fun they are to listen to as a group. That's all of those things. But yeah, if it's a good show, it's entertaining and informative to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. As a listener, what does a podcast have to draw you in? So you find a show that you think you're going to like, you hit play on the very first episode, not the current one, but you go back to when the show began. So what does that first episode have to make you keep coming back for more?
Orson Welles sounding like a radio announcer in the 1940s or 50s or something like that. No, what does the show have to keep me coming back? So much of this just comes down to the hosts, honestly. Like, this was something else that that changed for me over time when I was first getting into podcasting and discovered this group. I was listening to 30 shows a week. just devouring content about, like reviewing Incredible Hulk stories or Fantastic Four stories or Justice League of America stories, all these things. But I started to whittle them down based on who the host was. And a lot of times I found the better shows I liked had a host, had like a dedicated host and partner or co-hosts or something like that, because I liked the rhythm, the dialogue, the go-between. There were a handful of podcasters who could do one show, who could talk to me for 45 minutes straight, just explaining what happened in this issue of Daredevil, and something about the tone or the timbre of their voice or their particular cadence. It was soothing, it was fun, and it was listening, and I could listen to that particular show whenever, if it was just that one person. But a lot of times I liked the rhythm, I liked the back and forth, I liked feeling like I was eavesdropping on a conversation between friends. So that always helped. And to answer the question, like, more, what it became, this extension of, was I stopped caring about the subject of the podcasts once I really became enmeshed in this community, in this group, and doing this myself. I don't want to say I stopped caring about what they were talking about, but if it was like a show, I'll name drop these guys, the Waiting for Doom podcast, where these guys, Paul and Mike from Australia, review the comic book Doom Patrol and issues of that. I don't really care about the comics, but I'll listen to their show because these guys crack me up, and they're hilarious the way they banter with each other. And like the first 20 minutes of their show might have nothing to do with Doom Patrol. It's just them talking about their personal life or play gags on each other and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is all I need. I'll listen to the first 20 minutes, and then once, okay, we're going to review this comic, I'm like, all right, I'll switch to something else. But that first 20 minutes, I was like, that's fun. That's all I need from that show. So now it's so different because I don't discover a whole lot of new podcasts, but I think if there's something that is going to grab me, it really comes down to the host. Do I like them? Do I like their energy? If it's a more informative or news or sports subject podcast, like, do I trust them? Do I like their particular worldview or their perspective? If it's an entertainment podcast, just, like, do I feel like they have something worthwhile to say about this movie that I've already seen, and I already have my own opinion, so what do I care what they think about this movie? Well, there must be something about their level of engagement, their energy, their wit, something about it. So to bring me coming back, like I'm not going to say there has to be a cliffhanger ending. If you want me to listen to episode 2, yeah, you got to be funny, you got to be interesting, you got to care about what you're talking about, even if I don't care about what you're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah, most definitely. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, half the time, like you've been saying, there are a million Star Wars podcasts out there, but if you find the right one with the right set of hosts, then that's the one you're going to listen to, regardless of, and you end up following, like, you said you started on one podcast, you went to another, you started on this, you went to another. As a host, which we will get to later, but as a host, you started on one podcast, you went to a different one, then you're on your third podcast now with Cheerscast. It's like, the thing of it is, for me, I will follow hosts. Like, if they decide that their one show is now ending and they go on to, okay, what are you doing next?
Yeah, same way. I will do that too. I mean, that's part of like the Fire and Water network in this community that we've sort of built. We've all changed, like, over the course of like nearly a decade now of producing these shows together and interacting with each other. We've all come up with numerous new show ideas, and some we bounce off each other and we're like, is this going to work? It's like, oh, if it's something you really want to do, and then some of them might fall by the wayside, but it's like, hey, I'm gonna launch this new show. I was like, hey, I would love to be a guest on that whenever you need me, or something like that, and we'll follow along and we help each other out. Getting back to the thing that you were saying beforehand, though, a specific idea where, like, I was following a show for these hosts, but I decided to drop the show, was the Star Wars Minute podcast. which has now become like this cottage industry of podcasts where people watch a movie and review it 1 minute at a time. This actually started with these two guys who were reviewing the first Star Wars movie, and it was such this clever take on it, because again, what could you do with Star Wars that hasn't been done a million times? Well, to talk for 20 minutes about the first minute of Star Wars where you're only in the middle of the crawl and like what is going and all of these things. And these guys, they were funny, they were informative, like they researched the heck out of this, so every character who was in the background, they knew that actor's full IMDb profile and everything like that. And I was really digging that show, except it became clear, and one of the guys was very upfront, like he liked Star Wars and he liked Empire Strikes Back. He didn't like Return of the Jedi. And they went through the Star Wars minute and then Empire Strikes Back minute. And then when they got to Return of the Jedi, I could tell just as a listener, I was like, he's not having fun listening. He's not having fun making the show. This is a slog for him. They had brought on new guests every week, and it was clear that he wasn't talking as much. But the show had gotten so powerful, and these guys were like, we don't really like the prequels, we don't like the Phantom Menace, but the audience is demanding we keep doing the show. Yep. And I was like, guys, don't listen to the audience. That's the wrong. And of course, at this point, this is my wavelength. I'm like, do what brings you joy. This is the mantra of the Fire and Water Network that I'm part of. Find your joy. I was like, if you don't like these movies, do not spend the next year of your life hyper scrutinizing this movie 1 minute at a time. You're gonna go crazy. So I abandoned the podcast at that moment. As much fun as I was having, I was like, I think this is going to be a miserable experience listening to this 1 minute at a time for these guys. So I have no idea. I think they've done every Star Wars movie. The podcast is a huge success. I'm sure they've been happy with it. But like when I could tell, I don't think these guys are in this for the right reason, and that's my judgment. Who am I to say that? But I was like, I don't trust this. I don't want to listen to the show anymore. So that was when I bailed on Star Wars Minute. But first two movies of that one were fantastic.
Very cool, very cool. As a listener, do you prefer short 30 minutes to an hour and 30-minute shows, or do you prefer longer podcast episodes, as in 2 hours or more?
Again, subjective, very much depends on the content and the host. Depends on what I'm doing that day. If I'm on a road trip or if I need to go somewhere, for review type of shows, whether it's reviewing a TV show or a comic or a book or a movie or something like that, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube show or something like that, I prefer shorter the better. And I don't know what it is, but just something about like that. Give me the basic bare bones summary. Give me your thoughts and your feelings, your opinions and everything like that. Have some witty banter before and after that. But if you can keep that to 20 to 30 minutes, I'm good. If it's an interview show, which again, I don't listen to that many of those, but if it's something like that is more informative, or we're talking about like interviewing a musician or a filmmaker or an author, and we're getting into a much more of a history thing, those again, if the questions are good, if the host is engaging, if the guest has something profound or interesting to say, those I can listen to for 2 hours at a time. So again, like, yeah, I think if it's a review show, keep it short. If it's in an interview, as long as I'm engaged in the material, then yeah, I'll stick with that for longer.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As a listener, do you start at the beginning of a podcast, the most recent episode, or do you jump around?
Brenda, what's up?
It depends on how I find the show.
Okay.
If it's a show that is sort of like topical, if it's like a news or sports show or something that feels more contemporaneous, then I'll whenever I jump in, I'll usually just stay, and I probably won't go back very far unless, there's certain like topics or things that I know that they covered that might appeal to me. If it is a review show, like if it's something that I want to, hear their whole catalog, like going back, then whenever I discover, I'll start at the beginning. Yeah, again, that's going to depend on how and when I discover the show, how far along they are into it, and what it's about. If it's something that needs to be, or at least deserves, like expects to be consumed from beginning to end.
Yeah, absolutely. As a listener, how many hosts are too many on one episode?
19.
Okay, that's overkill.
Yeah. How many hosts?
Yeah, okay. So when I say host, essentially how many people? Yes, I am the host of this podcast. You are the guest. You are the co-host. But technically, we are two people on a podcast. Someone out there in podcast land may, these guys are the hosts. So how many people on a podcast is too many on one episode?
Anything more than 4 or 5 is generally pushing it. Again, it depends on who's the ringmaster, the ringleader in charge of this, like how good they are at herding sheep. I'll shout out another group of friends, the Longbox Crusade. They've got 4 guys in their regular group, and they have just a perfect repertoire for the 4 of them. Like they have each in an almost like miraculously short amount of time, because it started off with one guy, and then he brought in his friend, and then he brought in his brother, and then they brought in their other friend, and it became these 4 guys, and they just clicked right away from the first time it became this quartet. Everyone had a defined personality. It felt like they all had these inside jokes that you were a part of, even if you'd never heard of them before. And they sing when it's the 4 of them together. And again, that's one where I don't care what they're talking about. I listen just for the repertoire of those guys and whatever they're going on back and forth. If it's a review show, and because I just recorded one and I had 4 guests, so it was myself and 4 guests. So you got 5 people. It can be tough when you've got that many, managing, okay, what did you think about this particular scene in Ahsoka? And you have to wait till 4 people and make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk and there isn't a real lull in the conversation between, because, if somebody is dominating the conversation and somebody else doesn't feel like they're getting enough time, or you kind of lose energy. But I've been on shows where there were 7 of us, I think, talking about Avengers Infinity War, and it was a great conversation. I didn't feel like there were too many people. We all got to say something, and we all felt like we were contributing. So I think it depends on the particular host and how well they can manage a large group of guests and a large field of personalities. Whether those personalities, if everybody's saying the same thing, or if they have very contrasting viewpoints, and being diplomatic and resolving any possible tensions, although that's pretty rare in these type of podcasts that we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, as a host, I don't like to have more than 2 or 3 at the most. Sometimes it demands to have more than that. And I've done really good episodes where I've had 4 guests, and the content has been wonderful. But that's tough. I don't think I'm necessarily the best suited for that. I'm much more comfortable when it's a smaller group. But again, if a host is very deft and very capable, as many as they can handle.
Yeah, absolutely. I've often said that 2 to 4 is the sweet spot for just a normal, everyday, like general geek show where you're just talking about geek topics, that kind of stuff. If it's more specific to like when we do our top 100 countdowns, there's usually between 4 and 6 of us on there total, but that's because of, or 5 to 7 maybe, depending on whatever but tiebreakers and all that. But yeah, 2 to 4 is usually really good.
I also think that rule is somewhat different for audio versus visual podcasts.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like a YouTube show, if it's like a review show and you've got 7 people on the couch, because your mind can just make the adjustment of who's talking. But if it's just pure audio and you're listening to 7 or 8 people and it's like, have I heard this voice before? Is this the same person? Like it's sometimes harder to follow along.
Yeah, absolutely. When do you stop listening to a podcast altogether?
I mean, if they cross some line in my personal values, whether it's political, ethical, moral, or something like that, if I find out that, hey, this host believes something that I find morally repugnant or abhorrent in my personal political views, it doesn't matter if they're a really good host of this particular TV show or comic book. Yeah. I instantly lose interest in most of their opinions. Yeah. So that is usually a big turnoff. Those are pretty extreme because I can usually ferret those out much earlier. But like if I feel like the show has run its course, if they've just like if they've gotten to a point, I'll talk about like the West Wing Weekly, a show hosted by, one of them was the actor in the show, Joshua Malina, and his co-host were covering the TV show The West Wing. And once they got past season 4, which is where Aaron Sorkin and Thomas Schlamme were the showrunners, once they left, I didn't really care that much about the last 3 seasons of The West Wing. I watched them at the time, but it didn't have the same energy, so I wasn't really interested in what the podcast had to say about those episodes. So I quit after they covered the first 4 seasons. Same thing going back to Star Wars Minute when I could see the writing on the wall. I was like, all right, you're gonna cover a movie that you've said you hate. I was like, this isn't going to be any fun. I don't want to spend this time like listening to you guys like take this thing apart. So, yeah. If they get to a natural break point where I'm no longer interested in the content or their analysis of the content, then I'll walk away. Otherwise, it's if something happens where I just lose any respect or sense of value in what this person has to say. Yeah. Those are fairly extreme, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most definitely. Most of the time, if it's like you said, a specific podcast and it has a specific end point, and as long as you're still interested, that's usually when you would stop. But yeah, there are other times when things like that happen too. You said you don't listen to many anymore, but you've mentioned a few, but what podcasts are you currently listening to, if any?
Every once in a while, I'll listen to Pod Save America. A few shows on the Fire and Water Network that our friends do, especially in September and October. Chris and Cindy Franklin host the Supermates podcast, and they usually have 4 or 5 episodes, like seasonal, dedicated to Halloween and classic horror movies, and then horror comics or horror cartoons or something that they call The House of Frankenstein. It's like this little sub-miniseries. Those episodes are always a joy to behold. I love listening to them talking about those movies. Gosh, there really aren't that many. Like right now in my podcatcher, again, like going from I used to listen to 30, and now it's like maybe once a week. And I try to keep up and at least be receptive to what the rest of the network is doing, but I'm also just trying to expand and keep my mind about me. So I'm listening to a lot more audiobooks just because it's harder for me to read. I'm like 75% audiobook versus actual reading books now.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. All right, folks. Well, that's our halfway point. We're going to take a quick break. You're going to hear some ads and some other stuff. Oh, please stop it. Oh, my God. It's like I've made him drink 575 beers or something, folks.
It had to be 60 questions at least.
No, not even. We're going to take a quick ad break. Come back right after this.
Kid, Yes.
Shut up.
Beyond the Night is the GCRN's latest review podcast. We are covering everything in the Knight Rider television universe, from the classic 80s TV series to the 1991 reunion film, Team Knight Rider, and the 2008 relaunch series as well. So join TFG and Mike and Dion the Music Man as they go in-depth in Beyond the Night, only on Geekcast Radio Network. You can find Beyond the Night in iTunes and on www.geekcastradio.com.
Kid.
Yes, Michael.
Just keep driving.
Cheerscast, the podcast where everybody knows your name. Slide up to the bar alongside Ryan Daly and a rotating cast of guest hosts as they celebrate the long-running, award-winning television series, one hilarious episode at a time. New episodes of Cheerscast drop every Thursday, part of the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
Hello, geeks and geekettes! Looking for a podcast that covers a vast array of topics? Then check out Altered Geek Unleashed, where we discuss our thoughts on this week's geeky news, tech, gaming, television shows, movies, cartoons, comics, and more. So, get altered, get geeky with the Altered Geeks, every Friday on the Geekcast Radio Network.
Because the world needs another movie podcast.
The Geekcast Radio Network presents for your listening pleasure the Cinema Geek.
Hosted by Amanda, Kevin, Matt, and Dan.
Each week we dive headfirst in the landscape of movies as we discuss movie news, play movie games,
go in-depth on reviews,
and even have a top 10 countdown or two.
Also, don't miss our director retrospective series, where we review noted directors' movies film by film. Bottom line is, if you love movies and love podcasts, you need to experience the Cinema Geeks.
You can find us on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, or geekcastradio.com.
Hey Jared, I have this idea for a new show for the network.
What is it?
You know how I liked the 1990s comic book series, The New Warriors?
Yes. Yep.
And you know how at the Long Box Crusade we're trying to get the YouTube channel going?
Yes, also correct.
Well, thanks. So, how about you and me do a live stream show about the New Warriors? You've never read the books before, and I have them, and so that's a great setup. We could give it a catchy name, like Come Out to Play. Don't you think that's the greatest idea?
Sure, Delvin. That's a great idea. Just one question.
Yeah?
Why do you have me dangling off this ledge, holding me by only one arm?
Oh, yeah. Well, you'll get it soon. I hope. Come Out to Play, a New Warriors podcast, comes to you live on YouTube every second Tuesday of the month at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Longbox Crusade channel. If you can't watch it there, we replay them on the Longbox Crusade Network podcast feed, available anywhere podcasts can be found. We invite you to come along for the ride, or in other words, New Warriors, come out to play.
You are receiving a transmission from the Rod Pod. Upload pending.
Stand by for soundtrack transfer.
I am Maggie.
And I am John.
And we are trapped, hurtling through space in a ship shaped like Rodimus's head.
The ship, for reasons we haven't been able to determine, contains the entire run of the IDW Transformers Phase 2 comic, which chronicle the events following the end of the war between the Autobots and Decepticons. So we figure we may as well read them all in order and report our findings to you. Stand by.
Upload complete. Now.
The Rod Pod.
Look for us at marriedwcomics.libsyn.com
at iTunes, at Stitcher, or wherever good podcasts can be found.
So, till all are one.
Till all are one.
Till all are one.
Hold it! Hold it right there! Let's see if you're really ready to watch this movie. Okay, popcorn? Check. Soft drink? Check. Warner Brothers ball cap? Aha! You can't watch a Warner Brothers movie without a Warner Brothers ball cap. Listen, Doc, what if they ordered a Warner Brothers ball cap so they had it next time? Well, here's all you have to do, folks. Just send for this. A new Warner Brothers catalog. Use it to order your Warner Brothers ball cap. And while you're at it, you can order stuff like T-shirts, posters, movie books, ties. That's neckties. It's all in the catalog, which you can get now by dialing this 900 number. So when you get a chance, call... No, they have to call now. They can't watch the movie until they order their new catalog. You're despicable. Don't forget to call, folks.
Like science fiction? Of course you do, or you wouldn't be listening to the Geekcast Radio Network. Well, the Mark Who 42's Universe podcast is an award-winning sci-fi radio show that's been around for over 10 years. We cover everything from Doctor Who to the MCU to pop culture and everything in between. A new show drops on Tuesday mornings on the GCRN website and all of the major podcast platforms. So listen to the Mark Who 42's Universe podcast from the universe and beyond.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I'm the host of the Rock Nerd Radio Show, which airs live on HudsonRiverRadio.com every Wednesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It also gets backed up as a podcast, which you can find on your preferred podcasting platform. Every week on my show, I talk about all kinds of pop culture. I talk about music, I talk about movies, TV, comics, collectibles, and so much more. I also feature a guest on my show periodically, which you might enjoy. I have a couple of special segments on my show, one called the Cover Song of the Week and My Favorite Thing in the World This Week. If you think this sounds cool, check it out sometime. I hope you do.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk...
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing. Car.
Download the show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
All right, folks, we are back, and it is now time to talk all about Ryan's podcast production. As a producer, do you find yourself, we've kind of already covered this, listening to podcasts less and less?
Yeah, and it did happen like almost immediately. It was just I didn't have as much time. Yeah, just between the recording time and maybe this will answer a future question, but I do spend a lot of time editing my shows. I'm never comfortable if I just press record and then like export something and I'm like, yeah, nailed that one, and I'm ready to publish that one. Like it's gonna. I am way too self-conscious about my voice, about any possible technical issues. I have to scrutinize every episode. I have to take a scalpel to it and cut out the things that I don't think work. I used to try and take out every single and like and stutter and sometimes, but I found that occasionally those work themselves naturally into the musicality of the conversation, and I can let those go, especially once we're 20 minutes deep into the conversation. The audience just kind of covers up those little gaps on their own. But yeah, I do edit my shows pretty heavily after I produce them. And generally, I think, and I've talked to one of the other guys on the network, Ciscoid, I think we're pretty similar. We have like a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio where if we had an hour-long recording session, we'll spend 3 or 4 hours editing it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As a producer, are you a podcast planner, or are you just throwing stuff at the mic to see what sticks? Please don't throw stuff at me.
I might need you to clarify a little bit about this.
So podcast planning for me is when we started the network, we had a few shows. We had a couple of Transformer shows, and we wanted to do a movie show. Well, my thing was I had a whole wall of DVDs, and I planned out over 200 episodes before we ever launched the show. So
sure. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, at least because a lot of my podcasts have been index shows in some form, whether they were reviewing comics or whether they were reviewing TV shows. As an index format, okay, you're starting at this point, and then you're going chronologically chapter by chapter, so that kind of creates the plan in and of itself. There have been other exceptions to that, like with the Star Wars podcast that I've done where they haven't been indexed, but I've generally had multiple ideas, and it's just like, okay, I got a file of these ideas. Okay, what could be this episode? What would be the next episode after that? Okay, I could flip these around. These don't matter. But yeah, I've got tons of outlines of all of these different things and tons of plans. Podcasts that I've never done, I've got an outline for like 12 episodes, in depth, like partially scripted guests that I would talk about, like certain breaks in certain formats. And this is a show that I might never do, but I've got plans for it. So yeah, I generally plan out my shows pretty well detailed in advance. If it's an index show, that takes care of itself.
Yeah.
But if not, yeah, I generally have an idea of like the topics, like the music one. I've got a list of bands and artists and guests and people that I would talk to about those particular bands or artists or things like that.
Very cool, very cool. As a producer, are you a one-man show kind of host, or do you prefer working with co-hosts?
Again, this is tough. I am enough of a control freak about my projects that I mostly like to be the host with guests. And just because of the nature of the projects that I've had, whether the Star Wars show or the music show or Cheers Cast or Secret Origins, I've always had a rotating guest. And I'll bring some people back, especially if we have a good rapport and I'm friendly with them. I like having return guests every once in a while, but I also like to expand the field as much as possible and get new voices. But, there's sometimes like if you have a good rapport with somebody and you have a good rhythm, like Chris Franklin and we did a Batman show together for a couple of years. We tried to make it work, called Batman Nightcast, and it was I was doing the production and the editing in terms of I was recording it and I was editing every episode. But I considered myself a co-host with him, even though I was doing the behind the scenes thing. We alternated who would be the lead on who would do the intros and the outros and things like that, who would kind of like take the springboard. We rotated on and off, like even odd episodes and things like that. And that was so much fun, and I loved talking to Chris about that because we had very different experiences, but a lot of the same ideas and opinions. And God, I miss his laughter because I never get to record with him anymore. And that was a show that went through many permutations, and we kept changing it because that was the show that was the one of them after Secret Origins that I thought this is what the audience wants as the follow-up to it. But my heart wasn't in it the same way, and the timing was wrong because of, like, having a family, and things just kept, and then just things like the larger fandom of like Batman and his appearances in movies and comics and stuff like that just got to my head in ways that I think are kind of dumb now. Like, why do I care? Like these other things? But anyway, it just became untenable, and I grew to actually hate Batman and everything about him. So I was like, I can't do a podcast about it this week, Chris. I'm really sorry. So that, like, yeah, after many tries and different formats like that show kind of bottomed out.
This is Kevin Conroy. And I am the goddamn Batman.
I have a lot of regret about that because Chris and I, we both put as much of our heart and soul and effort into that show to make it work. And people, we did have a good, strong audience for that, and people loved it and begged us to come back and talk about more. And I wish we could. And again, that's a show that having that one guest that you could talk to every 2 weeks. Chris, we had so much fun, and I miss that experience. I would like to replicate that again sometime, but I don't know when. It depends on the material. You have to have the right show where you're in sync and you trust this person, that you can have these conversations, the same thing every week, and you're not going to get sick of each other. You're not going to repeat the same thing all the time. It has to be new. It can be tough to find. It can be tough to find a guest like that. But yeah, I'm fascinated and envious of the people who do find those.
Yeah, it's funny because I've always, well, not always, but now, 15 years later, I don't assume, because if I start assuming, it's making an ass out of myself and myself, because that's just the way assuming is. But it's one of those things where I usually, as the host, as the person that intros and outros shows, I am thinking that people, like, I'm not playing up to that. And, like, I'm more of, oh, you've been a insert cable provider name here, customer for 15 and a half years. We're going to give you all the perks and screw the new people. Whereas normally cable companies are like, no, if you're brand new to us, we'll give you this best price for this many years. And then after that many years, we're going to hike the price up on you and not give you a deal anymore because now we've got you hooked. I don't like that. I don't like the whole new customer model thing. I prefer the loyalty, the people that keep coming back. So that's really how I usually approach when I'm talking on my shows. It's like, if you've heard this before, skip 5 minutes. I've said that a lot on shows lately because I'm playing up to those that I know that have already listened for the last 15 years. But I guess I got to mix it up a bit here in a little while. Who knows? As a producer, do you feel you need a mixing board and all the fancy stuff that would essentially be found at a radio station, or are you good with a great microphone and headphone setup?
I don't know if I'm great with it, but this is what I've settled for. Yeah,
there you go.
Again, a simple $20 or $25 headset mic and just the software program that came with the computer.
Yep. Well, question 20 is something you've already talked about. I don't know how much more we can talk about it, but as a producer, how much time do you put into the editing of the show? Well, we've already said this, so...
Generally, like usually about 3 times the amount of the recording time to edit it. So.
Yep, pretty much. As a producer, do you prefer in-person recordings like you in the same room with your wife or with your friends or whatever, or do you prefer stuff like this over the internet via Skype, etc., etc.?
Just for the sake of editing and easier to control and things like that, I prefer recording over distances like this, like over Skype and Zoom. Even when I have recorded podcasts with my wife more recently, we've been in separate rooms on separate computers and done that thing. If I had a different setup, like where we could be at a table with a shared microphone, like a Snowball or Yeti or something like that, that would be different. Or if I had a studio, like some of my friend podcasters do, like where we had an actual room with soundproof walls and a table set up with different microphones. Again, if I was in a different situation, like my friends like at Radio versus the Martians, they have that because they live close to each other and they have an actual office space where they can record together all the time because that's how they became friends, and that is their setup. But I'm frequently recording with people who are in different time zones, let alone not in the same town I live in. So yeah, this is just for editing purposes and just natural.
Over the internet is the easiest, yeah.
Right, over the internet is easy. It's just that's the only thing I can for now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I've been doing over the internet for years, and I've only done 2 or 3 in-person recordings, and it just, because I've been doing it this way for so long, doing it that way for the 1 or 2 times I did it, it was like, this is weird. Why can't I just look?
Kind of awkward. Rob Kelly and I, we were at like Heroes Con in Charlotte one time, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and we were reviewing an issue of Avengers for one of his podcasts, and we did it in the hotel room, like between like breaks or something. We just had his like recorder out and the computer open, and we just like sat across from each other on the table, and I was like, why is this awkward? It's never been awkward before. It's like I've never seen your face while we were talking, but yeah.
Yeah. As both a listener and a producer, do you prefer one feed have everything, or should each type of show have its own feed? So basically, let's say you have a DC Universe podcast, but that covers the comics for DC, but you also want to include BTAS, STAS, the rest of the DCAU. Do you want that all in one, or do you want them all separate?
So at the Fire and Water Network, we've kind of cheated by having both. We do have an all-in-one feed where, despite the fact that we've got 40 different shows, you can subscribe to the Fire and Water Podcast Network feed and get all of the shows. But yeah, I mean, each one of our shows has its own separate feed, and within those, like, yeah, I usually, I mean, like, if I was going to, once I finished Cheerscast, if I was going to spin that off into a Frasier show, which I'm not, and I'll tell anybody listening and anybody who's going to ask, I'm not going to review Frasier after Cheers.
This is Dr. Frasier Crane. I'm listening.
But if that was the plan, I would start a new show called FrasierCast or something else like that. Like I wouldn't have that on the same feed as Cheers. When we were doing, if Chris and I were still doing a Batman comic podcast, if we wanted to do an episode dedicated to one of the Batman movies, we would have that on the same feed as the Batman show. We wouldn't need to do something different like that.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Like, again, if you create each show has its own, some people who listen to Cheerscast may not listen to the Batman show or may not listen to the Star Wars show, or the same thing with the you have to have that separation. At the same time, you can have a centralized, like, would you like everything? Do you want everything on your plate all at once? Here you go. Here's your option. It's your choice, but we're not going to make you have everything on one plate, kind of thing. Oh, and by the way, folks, 2025, I'm starting a Frasier podcast.
I'll listen to it probably.
Was there ever a moment when you were done with podcasting altogether? Like you just wanted to never do it again?
There was not one moment. There may have been several.
Okay. What
summer is this? Summer of 2022. I got especially burned out, and I won't go into the specifics of it.
Okay.
But I was in a bad headspace, and I was just like, I felt like podcasting was actually being more of a detriment to my mental health and my social engagement and other things. Like it was demanding too much of me, which is stupid because I was the one doing the demands because it's my hobby. But it felt like it was too much of a demand without any reward, and I was getting just really unhappy, and I was acting really. I'll censor myself, but I was not being a good person in my chats with the other Fire and Water members. But yeah, and I just needed time. I just needed like some mental health break from that. And I came out of that, and I just kind of recentered that, okay, I'm just focusing on the stuff that makes me happy. I'm just finding my joy. That's the only thing that I can control, and I'm going to do that. Earlier this year, for not mental but physical health reasons, I had to take a break just because I got really sick. But I've been okay. But yeah, I never want to. It feels weird saying this, on a podcast and hearing what a part of your life this has been. But I don't like thinking about taking podcasts that seriously anymore.
Okay.
It certainly was for a period of my life, but I am more comfortable in a space right now where if I never did another podcast, I'm like, okay, I'll find another creative outlet. I'm sure I'll always look back and say, oh, what if I did an episode like that? Or, damn, I wish I could have finished Cheers or something like that. But it's not going to break my heart. I've got other hobbies. I've got other things. I can see when I finish Cheers, I mean, that's still 5 years away. But when I do that, maybe that's it. Maybe that will be the end, and I'll be all out of things to say, and I'll have found other things to occupy my time. I don't see this being a lifelong thing, in as much as however much time I have left. So as long as it brings me joy, as long as I continue to have fun with it, as long as I feel like I have something to say for myself, then I'll keep doing it. But if at any point that stops being the case, I'm not going to force it.
Yeah, absolutely. It should never be about forcing it, whether it's for yourself or for anyone else. That shouldn't even ever. Just because I'm a machine and I've been, I've got over 3,000 episodes or almost 4,000 probably in 15 years, doesn't mean that everyone else should feel the way. I mean, for me, I will die. This CAD U-37 is probably going to be hanging out of my mouth when I die, most definitely. But that's just me, and that's fine. Some people approach it as a hobby, some people approach it as I approach it, and that's great because everyone has a different approach. That's the whole point and why the sub-series in this podcast of Studio 2009 is called Podcast Approach. Everybody's got their own way of approaching it, and as long as you're enjoying it, that's all that matters. At the end of the day, as long as you're enjoying it, as long as your guests have fun with you, that's really all that matters. Have you ever been on the radio before, besides like calling in and stuff?
Yes, technically.
Oh, okay,
yes.
good. Then this question will actually make sense for you. What do you see as the differences in podcasting versus being on the radio?
Well, control of scheduling, for one thing. Just not being live is an entirely different beast.
Mm-hmm.
So that just naturally gives you a sense of control, and that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Mm.
The difference between whether it's a live show and just feeling like the commitment of having to fill air, the tension, the pressure of needing just to be able to perform at a moment's notice, to have everything prepared. That can be scary as hell. And certainly just having a podcast where everything is prearranged, pre-produced in advance, and then published out to the world. But also, I mean, in radio, there's this sense of immediacy, and then it's gone unless somebody happens to be recording it. Whereas, if I said, something on my, second or third Star Wars episode of Dead Bothan Spies in 2015 or 16, and somebody comes back and says, well, in the context of 2023, that comment could be seen as racist, and now I'm like facing like a whole new set of standards and scrutiny. It's like wait, the world has changed, and now I'm being judged for something that I said out of context. And that's just like one weird example.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly the idea that what I'm doing in podcasting could be discovered, 10 years later, more, who knows when, and still feel as immediate to somebody listening to it then. It's a weird sensation. It's a weird idea.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've done any interviews with famous people, which one was your favorite?
I haven't, I don't think.
Okay.
Have I? I mean, I've interviewed a few comic book creators, but like they weren't if any of them happen to listen to this, forgive me, but like they weren't big name celebrities. I have thought about reaching out to some of the still living members of Cheers, but I don't know. Again, that feels like that's a lot of pressure. If they say no, that hurts. that kind of rejection, and it shouldn't. Also, if it could be worse if they say yes, because then I've really got to work. And it that also opens like a new floodgate of audience, like members and participation. Like then like am I ready for, if I got BB Newworth to talk about playing Lilith on my show, and all of a sudden, I like my download numbers explode. Now I've got to how does that affect me? Do I feel like I have to perform better on my shows? Do I have to change something about the way I do the show? Am I then expected to try and get George Wendt or John Ratzenberger and to try and top that and keep going? And then there's more eyes listening to the show, and then before long, somebody from NBC corporate is like, "Hey, you're playing the Cheers theme on your podcast. We're sending you a cease and desist letter." And I don't need that headache, so I'm just like, nope. I don't want to even invite that.
Well, as someone who has done many interviews over the years with Tara Strong, Maurice LaMarche, Rob Paulson, insert whoever here, the late great Kevin Conroy, the late great Jason David Frank, etc., etc. It was always about them and what they needed for that conversation. Like if some of their agents would be like, "We need to see the questions before." Okay, sure. Normally we don't show them, but if that's going to make them more comfortable, fine. We will show them to you, and I've never looked at it as, oh, do I have to perform better now that I've had this Maurice LaMarche is a perfect example. Love that man to death, but I thought he was going to fly from California to Kentucky to kill me. Yes, folks, I thought the Brain, the voice of the Brain, also the voice of Orson Welles and various things, was going to kill me in 2010, 2011, whatever it was. So on Tooncast for the voice actors, when we do voice actor interviews, we have a question of what is your favorite type of voice acting? Narration, animation, video games, etc. It's a general blank everyman question. It is not a specific question to a specific, oh, this is the game you're working on. How did you No, it's just a general question. Maurice LaMarche comes out and says, well, the interesting thing about video games is, as everyone knows, it's just, you in a room yelling at yourself or talking to yourself or whatever. And without any provocation, he says, I just got out of a session for Batman Arkham City as Mr. Freeze. You can hear my heart just leaping out of my, literally, you talk about those moments in editing where you're make it a little bit tighter, make it, whatever. Mm-hmm. Oh no, you can hear the dead silence. Could you give us a sample of the voice? What else was I supposed to ask? How do you drop a bombshell like that and not ask for a just a little? He goes, oh no, I signed an NDA, so I can't do it. And again, this is where I will say to the audience listening to this podcast, if you've listened to Studio 2009 in the last 3 years that it's been online, or if you've listened to any other shows that I've done in the last 15 years, you've heard this story before. Fast forward about, 50 seconds or more. I edited that show, so I asked him at the end if there was anything, and I do this to all, because of him, I do this to every guest, every episode, every time, no matter what it is. Is there anything you want me to edit out of the interview or the episode or whatever? I don't think we asked him. I got this interview online so fast. I then left my apartment. My mom and I went out grocery shopping. Back then in 2010, I only had a little Nokia, whatever, dumb phone, whatever it was. all of a sudden, because back then you could have text messages for Twitter, back when it was still called Twitter and all that and everything else, and you could have and my phone started blowing up. My buddy Steve Megatron, who started the network with me, he's like, "What did you do?" "Everything. I'm grocery shopping. What are you talking about?" "What interview did you and Kevin?" I said, "We just did the Maurice LaMarche interview. I edited it and got it up on the website." "What?" We are being blown up by everybody. So some little unknown website picked up the interview, and then IGN picked it up. IGN gets a hold of a bone they never let go. It had not been revealed yet who was voicing Mr. Freeze. We got the exclusive.
Nice.
And ever since 2011, I've been trying to live up to that moment, but I haven't really been living up to that moment. So as far as the whole, what if I get this famous person, and then I have to, there really is no expectation. Get who you want to get if you want to try to get them. That's completely up to you, I guess, is my whole point in saying all of that. Jeez. So now here are going to be coming some specific questions for Ryan based on Cheers cast. Number 26, what are your personal all-time top 5 favorite episodes of Cheers?
Ooh, I don't want to be withholding, and I don't want to be coy with that, but part of the thing with Cheers is I do rank the episodes at the end of each season. And at the end of the 5th season, I ranked all of the Diane episodes. I will give you, just for the sake of your audience, I will give you where we are up to this point, because I don't want to cast too far into the future.
Right.
How do you get through the day?
I don't want to answer this question completely, because part of the show with Cheers cast is at the end of each season, I rank every episode from that season in order, and I always make it clear this has nothing to do with the guest who appeared on that particular episode. This is just my ranking of the actual show that NBC produced. It has nothing to do, because we might have had a really good conversation about a really bad episode, and I don't want that to be a reflection of the guest who might have been on that. And at the end of season 5, I actually took the time to rank every one of the Diane episodes for seasons 1 through 5, and I've continued that trend with season 6. And my plan by the end of season 11 is to have ranked all of the 270 plus episodes in order. And as crazy as that will be, because I'm on the last episode when I do the feedback, I am going to read that list, or at least publish it on the website. I'll probably publish it on the website and just read like the top 50. But for the sake of this question, I can at least answer for the Diane episodes, the first 5 seasons.
Okay.
My top 5 favorite episodes, going down. Number 5 would be from season 2, Battle of the Exes. That was an episode that featured Carla's ex-husband, Nick Tortelli. Number 4 from season 5, Everyone Imitates Art. This is one where Sam gets a poem published, and it drives Diane crazy that she couldn't get a poem published beforehand. It turns out that Sam stole one of Diane's poems and put his name on it. Number 3, Diane's Perfect Date. This is when Sam accidentally sets Diane up on a blind date with a convicted murderer. Season 2, Old Flames. Number 2, this is one when a friend of Diane's a friend of Sam's tries to break them up right after they've started dating. And number 1, also from season 2, Fortune and Men's Weight, is my number 1 favorite episode so far. This is one where they get a scale in the bar that if you weigh yourself, it gives you a fortune, and it comes out with all these cryptic little messages, and they begin kind of taking on this sort of superstitious life where the fortune become kind of predictive of bad things that happen to the members of the bar, and it's just it has one of the all-time funniest exchanges, including the cast, and the oldest member of the cast, this guy Al in the background, who just hits this one comedic beat, and he hits it twice, pitch perfect. If you know the episode, you know the joke I'm talking about. If not, I'll just tell you to watch the episode Fortune and Men's Weight as one of the all-time greatest gags in the show. And so far, those are my top 5 favorite shows from the first 5 seasons of Cheers. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Very cool, very cool. So, folks, it's been 41 years since Cheers debuted and 30 years since it ended. Technically, that means the thing's been around 71 years. Not really, but that's math for you. And yes, we are old. We know it. But in 10 years from now, what do you think podcast listeners will think about Cheers Cast that they have never heard, if they have never heard the show before?
Well, one of the things about Cheers the show, and one of the reasons that I love it, and the reason I do it is because it is my favorite TV show of all time. And I think one of the reasons why it is such a strong show is it has this weird timelessness, where I think a lot of most of the humor still holds up today, these 30 to 41 years later. And I think because Cheers in its own way avoided a lot of pop culture references that you don't see with modern TV shows. Modern shows are, because they are part of, they're too aware of their own sense of being in pop culture that they can't help but recycle it and regurgitate it, and it just becomes trendy. So if you watch shows like The Office or 30 Rock or Scrubs that might have been popular 10 years ago, you can see, oh, this was something that was trendy in 2009, or, oh yeah, this is a joke about that particular president or something like that. But going back to something that the creators of Cheers said, I think Cheers was one of the last TV shows that was written by people who didn't grow up watching TV. They grew up reading books, reading plays, doing things like that, and TV was part of their life, but it wasn't something that, like, they weren't raised on TV. So they didn't think about television the same way. And I think that informs the writing of the show and how much each episode feels like a play you could see on stage. And it has this timeless nature that I think makes it still hold up incredibly well all of these decades later. And if I'm just reaching for the stars, if somebody finds Cheers Cast in 10 years, I hope they say the same thing.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, absolutely. Once your current podcast ends, what's next for you in the world of podcasting? What's the next great Ryan Daly idea?
I don't know. I think I sort of said, like, when Cheers is over, I might be done. But there are other shows that I have an idea for a limited G.I. Joe podcast. It wouldn't be an ongoing thing. It would just be like a mini series. I have an idea for a Simpsons podcast, which seems like it would be the opposite of that. I've got ideas for certain movies that I would like to cover. Like, if I did something, they would be smaller, self-contained projects. Something that wouldn't occupy as much time, something that wouldn't have the same kind of deadline. I can't say, because we're talking about something that's 4 or 5 years down the road, and my ability to predict or forecast that far in advance is I have no track record for that.
Okay. What advice do you have for new and veteran podcasters in the art of podcasting?
The same thing, along with any endeavor. It's kind of the same thing. Anytime you're starting a new job or a new creative process, whether you want to write a book, whether you want to make a movie, whether you want to do anything, consume a lot of what you like. Just find out what you like. Think about why it works for you. What does that host do well? How is that show produced? Ask a lot of questions about it. Reach out to them if you can. Ask them for advice. Ask them technical things, but also understand you're not being graded on this, and except for the fact that if you want to be anything like me, then just find something that makes you happy. Do something that is fun. Don't be afraid of failure. Recognize that your first episode is probably going to suck, but also recognize that you can record a first episode, and if it sucks, throw it away and do it again. Redo it. Don't put a product out there that you're not happy with. Sometimes, I mean, I've had to scrap entire episodes before and re-record them with the same guest or with a different guest for whatever reasons. The first episode of Secret Origins that I said, Chris Franklin was my guest. We recorded that episode over 3 different sessions. Because like there were things where I was like, no, this is the first episode. I really want to make sure I come out gangbusters on this one. Everything has to be perfect. Like, I'm not happy with this thing. Chris, can I get you on the phone for another 20 minutes so we can just re-record this part? And he was gracious, and he was like, yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of the opposite. But that was after I had been podcasting for a year. So at that point, I felt like, okay, I'm more comfortable having this demand on myself. But, you know, like when the first Star Wars show that I did it was crap, and I would never go back and even listen to that episode again. But I've done episodes like another episode of Secret Origins that I recorded with Siskoid where I listened to the playback and I was like, was I sleepwalking through this episode? What the heck is wrong with me? And I called Siskoid. I was like, hey, I can't even explain it, but there was nothing technically wrong, but can we just do this again? I just feel like I need another swing at the bat. And he was like, absolutely. No problem for me. And the second try was much, much better. So unless you're crunching some weird deadline that you impose on yourself, take your time, make sure the product is up to your standards. If it's not, redo it. You're not offending anybody, but yeah, reach out to other people, get as much advice as you can. And just, you know, don't be afraid of failure, and also just like think about are you doing like would you do the show if you knew 10,000 people were going to listen to you? Would you do the show if only 10 people were listening to you?
I'm doing the show.
Would you do the show if only your mom was listening to you? You got to kind of figure out like at what point is this show not worth your time? And if it is, do it with all of your heart. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I completely agree. All right. Speaking of all your shows, where can people find your shows?
The Fire and Water Podcast Network, which you can find at fireandwaterpodcast.com. This is the catch-all website that has all of my shows, all the shows produced by my friends, guys who have become like my brothers, Rob Kelly, the Irredeemable Shag, Siskoid, Chris Franklin, our weird sort of cousins now, in Sean, Paul, and Max, who have also kind of come onto the network and do some amazing shows. Also, one of our co-contributors and co-hosts who we lost a few years ago, Zoom Yukinori. But yeah, you can find all of our shows, and if you just go to the shows tab, you can see the many, many projects that we've done. If you're specifically looking for me, again, Secret Origins podcast was probably what everyone tells me and continue to tell me is the best thing that I've ever done. Some generous people are like, you peaked with Secret Origins podcast. It's been a slow downhill from then. And I'm like, thank you, Dave. That's really nice of you to say that. But yeah, I've still got, you know, Star Wars podcasts on there, Black Canary podcasts on there, Fire and Water Records, which is me and usually my brother, but sometimes other guests talking about music, our favorite bands, favorite albums, things like that. And even if you don't care about me, if you want to know, if you want to listen to shows about the DC animated universe or the Justice Society of America or MASH, the other TV show, if you want to hear a gaggle of French Canadian girls talking about which Marvel superheroes are hot or not, believe it or not, you can find that on our network. So yeah, check it out, the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, folks, we are almost approaching the 2-hour mark, so we're going to take another quick ad break just because of the way the things work, and we'll come back with the outro right after this.
Do you like retro cartoons? then Saturday Morning Rewind is the podcast for you. Join them each month as they talk about classic cartoons and interview legendary voice actors like Jim Cummings.
I am the terror that flaps in the night.
Corey Burton.
Sometimes toys can be so flighty.
Rob Paulson.
Sure, Blaine, but how are we going to find chaps our size?
Nancy Cartwright and many more.
Eat my shorts.
So grab a bowl of Lucky Charms.
They're magically delicious.
Put on your hammer pants. Go to SaturdayMorningRewind.com. And be prepared to feel like a kid again. Once again, that's SaturdayMorningRewind.com. Saturday Morning Rewind was voted Best Podcast Ever by its host, Tim Nidell. So it's gotta be good.
Discover a world of vintage and modern toys that's more than meets the eye with the Triple Takeover Toycast.
Hosted by toy writers and photographers Toybox Soapbox, 6O, and TF Square 1, this informal and chilled out series of discussions cover everything from vintage Transformers to Mask, Diaclone, Microman, and more, be it nostalgic or current.
Whether you're a seasoned collector or a casual robot enthusiast, all are welcome.
Triple Takeover Toycast.
Hi, welcome to Up Nerd. What is Up Nerd? Up Nerd is a podcasting network of shows hosted by me, The Uneven Flow. People have told me I like to talk at them about a pretty wide range of topics, comics, games, movies, books, or whatever, and now I'll be able to talk at you. Along with the weekly show will be 2 bi-weekly shows. First we have Find You Pick, a show where one host picks a movie, then both hosts have to watch it. Then the next episode, the other host picks the movie. Each show will have a breakdown of why it is that movie was picked by that host, after which will be a discussion about what it is we just watched. Lastly, we have the show Top 3, Bottom 3. Similarly to Find You Pick, one host picks a television series, and the next week, the pick alternates to the other host. Here, the episodes of the show are chosen by the top 3 episodes and the bottom 3 episodes, as rated on IMDb.com. Yes, this is probably the worst way to watch and review a television show, and yes, that's the idea. On our shows, I'll detail out how you can suggest things for us to watch. You can reach out and talk with the hosts, and maybe even appear on an episode. I hope you'll join me for this exciting new podcast adventure. I swear we're going to make it more than 8 episodes.
All right, folks. The 75th episode of Studio 2009 is in the books. It has been Ryan Daly's podcast approach from Cheers Cast, Secret Origins, and other things. So, yeah, coming up here on Studio 2009, we've got, things are in flux, like we've talked about in the last 2 hours. At this point, after 15 years of doing this, everything with me is in flux when it comes to podcasting. Episode 76 may or may not be the long kiss goodnight. However, I do know episode 77 will be our continuing, even though it's been longer than 12 months, but I'm calling the spotlight 12 months of, surprise, surprise, Star Wars episode 77. Can you guess, Ryan? Can you guess?
77? Did anything noteworthy happen in the year 1977? Really?
I don't know. I mean, wasn't that... No, the Superman movie was a year later, so there's that. And, yes. So my buddy David Draper and I are continuing on with our 12 months of Star Wars stuff here inside Studio 2009, and we will be going back to A New Hope. Episode 78, once again in flux, but somebody said something to me about this series at the time being on a certain streaming service, and I was like, oh, I have Amazon Prime. LA Law, Season 1, maybe not, I don't know yet. I like watching all seasons and just covering it all at once instead of having to do episode by episode nowadays. That's just the way that I roll around here, I guess. So, thank you for joining us here inside the studio. If you'd like to get in contact with us to leave feedback for the show, there are several ways to do so. Visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can listen to and comment on all of our content. Here are all the ways you can listen to us nowadays: Apple and Google Podcasts. Leave us reviews, please. Spotify and any other podcatching client you choose to use. Follow leave the show's feedback in iTunes. Yes, iTunes is still a thing, even here in 2024. Follow us on X, whatever that is, at Geekcast Radio for the network, at It's ITS Studio 2009, all one word. I am at TFG and Mike. I don't think Ryan's there anymore, which is fine. Become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Geekcast Radio Network. You can also check out Studio 2009 podcast over there as well. Is Cheerscast on Facebook? I think you are.
Yes, Cheerscast does have a Facebook page, yeah.
Okay. Very cool, very cool. Go give Cheerscast a likes, folk. A likes. Wow. I can't talk tonight. For now, I'm TFG and Mike with...
Ryan Daly.
You'll hear us back in the studio soon.
I'm off. But, Sammy, can I let you in on a little secret? Sure. I knew you'd come back. You did? You can never be unfaithful to your one true love. You always come back to her. Who is that? Think about it, Sam. Well, I tell you, I'm the luckiest son of a bitch on earth.